Okay, here we are. Well, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you might be watching from. With us today to discuss her virtual residency with the Philharmonic Society of Orange County, and to talk about this past year, about what's to come, and to answer some of your questions from home. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming three-time Grammy Award-winning violinist Hilary Hahn. Welcome, Hilary. Thank you so much for being here with the Philharmonic Society.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Great. Well, also joining us in this conversation is a familiar face to those of you who are regular attendees of Philharmonic Society concerts. He is a multi-award-winning arts journalist, host of Arts Alive for KUSC. In addition, he hosts and produces the internationally syndicated concert broadcast of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He is no stranger to conversations like this one. Please also welcome Brian Lauritsen. Brian, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Hilary. I can't wait to have a great conversation. And for everyone watching that is a regular attendee of Philharmonic Society concerts, I can't wait to get back to being regular attendees. So looking forward to that.
That is an understatement of this year, Brian. Well, I want to kick things off first, Hilary, by just really saying thank you. Your virtual residency was by far the highlight of our fall 2020 season. As you know, we weren't able to have any live performances. This was really the closest thing to real live music. You know, of course, we did some live streams as others have, but these programs, your attention to them, specifically creating and curating them for this residency, was so special. And because you had such creative ideas and unique programming, from your first program with the solo Bach, where we felt like we were in your basement home studio, where you welcomed us and gave us a tour. Then your playing of the entire Mozart Fifth Concerto, as well as brand new cadenzas. This was like a violinist's dream come true, their dream masterclass. And then this third and final program, which was just so creative and included a new commissioned work by Michael Abels and its world premiere performance, in addition to your, I would call it performance art and really fearless presentation of The Lonely Violinist. It was all just a superb and welcome treat for us all this year, where so much of what we all did was somewhat formulaic. This really was not just filling the void of programming. This was indeed a welcome break from that. And I know that many others who watch these programs would say the same. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the Philharmonic Society for really bringing the music to life virtually to us across the last 3 months. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's the first time I've ever done a virtual residency, and I was really able to observe what it was like over the past, over the first 6 months of the pandemic and the shutdowns. As an audience member who really loves going to concerts, I was able to observe what works for me as someone who really enjoys hearing and experiencing music. And the chance to do this virtual residency where it was located in the virtual space was really special. And it's something that I think has legs for the future too, when actual concerts are in person again. Being able to create a thing that exists in a virtual space for a virtual space is really special and valuable. So I'm really grateful for the chance to dig into all of that, and for the 2 commissions that you enabled. It was really, really meaningful for me this fall, and really kind of kept me going, because I've only had 2 weeks of work all year, just due to a sabbatical and then cancellations. So I had 2 in-person weeks, and I had 3 virtual concerts for the Philharmonic Society. So you definitely dominated my fall.
Well, it was absolutely our pleasure. And you mentioned something, and I want to kick it over to Brian, because I know he had a question about that S word that you just threw out, sabbatical. So Brian.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm curious about that moment for you, because the first half of your sabbatical, right, was exactly as you planned it. And then the second half of your sabbatical was like, oh wow, we're living in this, super uncertain time, with a lot of anxiety, and probably plans that you had for, I don't know, travel, or even, like you say, just going to a concert. Like, all of a sudden you can't do that. So, I mean, take us through those moments. Like the first part of Sabbatical, for those who don't know, you took 19 and 20, the concert season of fall of 19 and spring of 20 off. And I'm curious, like, what were your plans? What got thwarted? What did you learn from this moment that we have all experienced in 2020?
I actually go into my bigger breaks, whether it's a sabbatical. This was the longest I'd ever planned. It was a year. I planned a calendar year. Well, not a calendar year, a 12-month sabbatical from September through the end of August. And I really could not have anticipated what I would experience in the course of this sabbatical, and also what I would be re-entering into. There's just so much that has changed in everything about how people relate to each other. And the art,
like, did you have goals? Sorry, did you have goals going in?
No, I didn't. So
Yeah,
when I take a break, I step away from work, and I take the breaks specifically to not have plans, because my normal schedule is about 2 years out. So I wanted to I took a sabbatical 10 years ago, and it was a 6-month one. And now I have 2 kids. So I was like, well, in order to get 6 months of sabbatical, I need to take a year. So in the 6-month sabbatical, I realized so many things about myself. Like, I thought I knew what I'd want to do as soon as I got off the road, and it was not at all what I wanted to do. And then I recalibrated a lot of things for the following decade, the last decade, based on what I learned in that time. And I just thought, now my life looks very different from what it looked like 10 years ago. So let's see who I am now when I take out the things I think I am and the structures that I have in place. So for the fall, actually, I was just adjusting. So all of the fall of the sabbatical, the first 3 months, I was kind of reeling. I was like, whoa, because suddenly my life is very different from how it was 10 years ago. I have 2 little kids. I have done a lot more projects. I had a certain momentum going, and I'd really pushed the last few years, not necessarily by touring all the time, but just really trying hard to like elevate my work. At the same time, I get to the core of my work and the core of my musicality and my identity as a performer who's officially now in my prime. Like, when you're in your 40s as a classical performer, you're like mature and in your prime. And so you're just hitting your stride. So I really had arrived at that point, step back, whoa, it all hit me. Like, all the stuff I hadn't adjusted to yet just hit me like a wave. And I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. That's what the fall is going to be about. The fall is going to be about letting everything fall back into place and finding an equilibrium. And then I started taking some classes for fun in January, and I'd signed up for the next semester. And so January through March was like, sort of, I was taking art classes, I was taking some language classes, and I was looking at getting back into playing. I was going through all my old etude books just for fun. And I was like, oh, actually, these are really nice etudes, or I don't think I would ever want to perform this etude. And in the course of the spring, I was really starting to hit my stride. I was mentally sort of prepping for coming back in the fall, thinking about the repertoire, thinking about, how do I want to do the next few years within the structures that I already had in place. And then, then March arrived, and I had been going to concerts pretty much every week and going to ballet, going to theater. So it was a really big part of how I was experiencing the arts. And I was also planning to do some fun travel before I went back to the pre-planned travel, which I love, but was very busy. But I have to say, the goal of the sabbatical was to get to know who I am, and nothing forces that more than total sequestration with your children and your family. I learned so much about who I am and what I care about, and I actually was I was able to sort of reshift some of my priorities, I think, based on things that I learned about people and humanity and people's experiences in the world. And I would not have done that were it not for this whole experience. So I don't believe in silver linings, but I think this whole time is transformative for everyone and in different directions for everyone. At first, I was really disappointed because you can't reschedule a sabbatical. I was just mourning the sabbatical disappearing because I can't just like cancel something else in 3 years and put another sabbatical in there. It took me a long time to plan it. But I actually am really glad that I was on sabbatical at the time that everything shut down, because I was able to sit with everything that was happening and experience it as a person in a community rather than trying to adapt and reschedule concerts and make all those decisions along the way.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's go ahead, Tommy.
Oh, I was just going to say it's your points are so well spoken, and we all I really appreciate that you say there's really no silver lining, or you believe there's no silver lining in this, but it's all an individual experience. But I will say, as a parent of 2 children who I believe are very close in age to yours, I feel your struggles, and in this new virtual world, finding nap times to record in, and then having someone open the door and finding a space outside of your home to do things. It is a new world, and I'm curious how, now that we've all been forced into it, this live streaming concerts, how has it changed your relationship with the music, with the violin, and with your audience? And I personally think that we will have quite a bit of this virtualness carrying through, even when things come back to, quote, normal. But how do you think it's changed your relationship with the music and with your audience?
It gave me a chance to explore a different way of performing. I think the expectations around production are different right now, and it gives a chance for artists to familiarize ourselves with conceptualizing and self-producing certain kinds of performances. And so for me, it really kind of took off the production aspect that is usually around anything I do that's video. There's usually a crew. There is
You were the crew in this one.
I was the crew. I was pretty much I had help on one of them, but the rest I did all myself. But I know there's normally a crew, and there's sound check, and there's like a lot of expectation that it's almost a record. If there's any kind of video production, there are rehearsals, multiple cameras, angles, someone does post-production, a lot of production as far as, when you cut from this angle to that angle and feature the orchestra and feature the soloist. So I didn't really have a place to experiment with the direct performance aspect. And this really gave me a chance to do that, which bridged a gap in my career, I think, because I do connect very directly with fans through Instagram and through various social media things. Like I do every so often, I do 100 days of practice where I post a minute of my practice from every day for 100 days in a row. So I had been playing for the fans before, but that's actually me just doing my work and sharing it. And this was really, what do I really want to play and present? And another thing is that concerts are usually programmed so far in advance, but this, with the reshifting of all the repertoire plans for pretty much everyone, it was a real chance to kind of participate in things in the moment, like world premieres in the moment that are happening. Pieces are being written in this time. Mm-hmm. We entered this time, we commissioned these pieces, and then they were premiered in this structure of pandemic and essentially global shared trauma, but also the heightened connectivity of the arts in this time. It's just shown everyone, I think, what they value about the arts. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but it's kind of allowed me to like tie a few more things together that I hadn't tied together before.
And there's a couple of really interesting prongs to that. I think, you know, first of all, you talk about like the purpose-built nature of what this Philharmonic Society residency has been. And I think one of my favorite lines of conversation to come out of the idea of classical music folks turning to virtual spaces during this year comes from a conversation I was having with Esa-Pekka Salonen, which he always has the best lines, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
But he's like,
he's succinct and very to the point.
Yeah, so this is like in maybe May, I think we're talking, and he's at his lake house in Finland, and we're doing a radio program for the station here in LA. And he said, you know, it's one thing for us to make mosaic videos of orchestra players in their jammies playing Beethoven. It's another thing to like actually be creative in this moment, and what can we do to leverage possible advantages to this moment. And one of those advantages clearly is, as you're talking about, the connectivity, right? And so like I'm looking through, and we have pre-submitted questions for this hour, 20 minutes of which has already gone by, but we've got questions from Turkey and Morocco and Switzerland and the Philippines and Indonesia and Atlanta, Georgia, and El Salvador, and Irvine, California, and Costa Mesa, and Los Angeles, and like Portland, Oregon. So like here we are all around the world right now, sharing a single space. And like there's incredible power in that too, right?
Yes, and one thing that continues to blow my mind is the idea of virtual world premieres. I've been doing those in a couple different formats this fall, and it blows my mind because there is usually an issue around world premieres that's both positive and negative, which is that the people in the hall for that concert are the people who experience the world premiere, and the world premiere only happens once, and it's the most hyped performance, and it's also the first performance. So after that, then you have the issue of hearing it again. How do you hear it again? How do you get to a place where you can play it again? And doing virtual world premieres has a few advantages because people can experience it around the world all at the same time, which I think is a fantastic thing to connect with new music, honestly. And people can also, with a streamed event, they can usually listen again and get more familiar with the piece before the piece goes back to whatever its life is going to be beyond the premiere experience. And also, because it's a piece that is made for a virtual space, it's also a piece, therefore, that can be played in many different environments. If it works in a virtual space, it can work in a chamber concert, it can work in a big venue, it can work on the street busking, it can work, you know, if it works virtually, it works anywhere. So I just am so appreciative of the new music sharing experience that's possible in these times. And it's not, I mean, it's really quite a thing to be recording yourself doing a world premiere. Like, I nearly lost my mind when I was setting up the lights and then trying to test the sound, but my adrenaline was pumping. And I'm like, usually when I'm about to play, I lose my logical brain. So trying to be logical and also intuitive was quite the leap of mentality, but really a good experience for me because it took me out of the realm of sort of feeling any amount of precious around a performance, and just you get it set and then you just play it. And it was really nice to have that experience in addition to having all the experiences I've had with live world premieres in the past.
It was certainly a great experience for all of us, and the piece was fantastic. I hope it gets played more in many.
I'm playing it more, I'm
virtual
sure.
and non-virtual, absolutely.
It will.
I want to take a step back though, and you're talking about recording new music, but you started this residency by recording something that I from what I read and what I've heard, you actually, the only time I've personally seen you in solo recital was with solo Bach. and it is how you started this residency. And so I have a question. I'm going to weave in an audience question, but I'm curious, where did your love of Bach come from? In your bio, it's referred to as a constant in your musical life. So I'd love to ask that. And then a question from Jonathan Novak in Portland asks if you have any interest in going back and re-recording the Bach sonatas and partitas from your first album. And if so, would they sound different today?
Yeah, I think I can tie that all together. The first experiences I had with Bach were as a student, like when I was probably, well, even in the Suzuki program. So I was a Suzuki student initially, and I recently recorded books 1 through 3 for Suzuki for that method. So my recordings are the standard, the one that comes with the books now. And in the course of doing that, I was reminded one of the first pieces I ever played was by Bach, but arranged in the Suzuki program. And then I started doing the solo Bach works when I was, I think 8 or 9. I started with the G minor sonata, and on my first recital, my first full recital when I was 10, I played 2 movements, the Siciliano and Presto from the G minor sonata. So it really started there. All my lessons, there was always some solo Bach that was being worked on or being requested or on the back burner or about to be performed. So I had a lot of constant work on these 6 sonatas and partitas. Along the way, I learned the Bach concerti and I played the Bach Brandenburg concerti. And then I also got a chance to do some of the arias for a recording, and that kind of rounded off some of those experiences that I hadn't had before. But my first recording, the reason I recorded solo Bach for my first recording was it was the music that I'd played the most. When I was asked what I wanted to record, I said solo Bach, and it was radical at the time that a 16-year-old would be recording solo Bach. It was considered something that only the mature players would know how to play. But my teacher was in his 80s, and I had been sort of taught, a few of the shortcuts to maturity, I suppose. And I'd listened to a lot of classic recordings. So yeah, for me, to do that as the first recording just really made sense. And I think also for the record company, it's just one person. It made a lot of sense too. So they took a risk in that, but it also wasn't much of a risk for them. And it could be said that it was a risk for me, but it really wasn't much of a risk for me. And it was just my zone. But I was 16 and 17 when I made those recordings for the first record. So I'm sure I play it differently now, but I do wonder if it would be that drastically different, because in a sense, I feel like there's more continuity over the big picture with my Bach interpretations than there is from day to day. So I don't have a definitive way of playing any of the pieces. I've played them so many different ways that my style is recognizable. It's still my type of interpretation of Bach and still my technique, but the details change almost like 180 degrees from one day to the next. So it would kind of depend on the day that I would re-record it. I don't know.
Sure.
I think, maybe at some point I would, but what was funny is that I recorded half of the set when I was 16, 17. It was released in 97. And people were asking for the rest of it. And I waited a really long time and recently released the second half of the set. And I was like, oh, now people will be like, oh, you completed the set immediately. When are you going to re-record the first part? And I'm like, I just went through this whole huge, like decades long process of getting myself to the place where I would record the rest of it. But I really did enjoy the process of getting back into the studio with it. So I don't have plans, but I suppose maybe it'll sound different enough in another 10 or 20 years.
Sure.
I mean, it's a snapshot in time, right? Because I would imagine like you walk out on stage to play Bach and there's freedom in the moment to do something different from even you had planned, right?
Yes, things happen on stage that I've never done before. And I know that if I am really familiar with the music, I can just go with it. I've done some combination of whatever it is that just occurred to me somewhere in the past, and it will be fine. So I just go with it. And that's what makes it really fluid and very natural, almost like I wrote the music, because in a sense, I have to inhabit it in order to be able to reinterpret it.
Yeah. A question from Grace in Livingston, and it doesn't give me the state, so this could be anywhere. But there is a Livingston, California, or Texas, or Maryland. Anyway, Grace
I'm
wants
sure there's
to know,
also an international one.
right? Yeah, I didn't even get that far in my Googling, but Grace wants to know, she's seen the news that you've made this week with your new collaboration with some artificial intelligence and composer music. And Grace wants to know, how do you choose what projects to undertake? What drives you, creatively, what draws you into certain projects?
The projects that I do may seem sort of disparate, but they all arise organically. So I recently, we just this past week launched an organization called deepmusic.ai, which is what you're referring to, which is, it's just starting out, but our goal is to connect creatives with the AI tools that are being developed so that they can actually work together better in the future rather than developing as two different separate worlds. I think it'll sort of become, AI art of all different kinds will become sort of a genre of its own. And then there will be tools that'll be really helpful for artists who are continuing the traditional art form in their own way. And if we don't have that vision and try to enable those conversations, that vision can't become reality, because people need to be able to communicate, and there needs to be someone driving that communication, organizing it, encouraging experimentation on both sides. So that's our goal. And I've known my co-founder, Carol Riley, who's a roboticist and AI expert, and I've known her for like at least 10 years socially. We met through mutual friends, and she called me a couple of years ago with this sort of thought process she was having, and we really got into a really interesting conversation. So that's how this whole thing started. And we just kind of kept talking. We decided, let's just do something with this. And people may remember I had a collaboration with Hauschka, the improvisatory / everything man of all trades, beautiful musician. He plays on prepared piano, and he uses tech tools as well, like looping and various, he's a combination of like digital and analog inventor. And it's really beautiful what he's doing. He's doing a lot with soundtracks now, so you may see his name credited, Hauschka. But we did a record, Silfra, and that arose out of another like 2 or 3 year project where we just kind of crossed paths. We were introduced by mutual friends, and we just started experimenting together musically, and we found a groove. So we decided to go into a studio and see if we have anything. And we walked out with a completely produced record. Like, we had 10 days in the studio. We recorded for 5, post-production for 5. And I looked at him at the end, and I was like, we just made a record. He's like, yeah. I said, I'm a little scared. He's like, don't be, let's get it out there. And I'm so glad we did that, because I wasn't trained as an improviser, but that was really the first time I kind of trusted my creative voice. And I learned so much from that. I did a commissioning project in 27 pieces, Hilary Hahn encores, and that arose out of me being sort of pushed to do a sort of popular encores album over a number of years. It kept coming up, and I was like, where is the new music? Where are the new encores? Let's make a new set of things, because we keep recycling the old stuff that I love, but let's find some new things that we can love that reflect our time right now. And that's what got me really thinking a lot about contemporary music on a grander scale. So these projects, I am very much in my lane as a violinist and as a soloist and as a professional performer, but I am completely inspired by the creative process of any artist. Like, I could talk for days with people about creative process, and I love it. So anything that teaches me about other people's creative process, where I share other people's creative process, where I get to talk about it, where I get to inspect my own creative process. That's really what keeps me innovating as a musician.
That's great. And actually, it was going to segues perfect into the question I was going to ask you. It's about when you're not playing the violin. And Elena Miyamoto has submitted a question saying, when you aren't playing the violin, what everyday activities or hobbies do you partake in that benefit your creativity and your sense of musicality? Or do they benefit them? You know, do you check out on non-playing days?
Yeah, that's actually a super interesting question for me to contemplate, because when I'm playing for, usually I have a goal. I have a concert coming up. I have a rehearsal, a recording, something like that. I rarely play violin for myself, but when I do play in a structure towards something, I find it really helps me personally. So music is sort of this is an interesting in-between space for me, where it's work, but also really a personal outlet at the same time. But then I really like doing visual art. For fun, I will draw or paint or doodle or make things. The other night I was just, I got some, like, for presents a few years ago. I never got around to it, and this kit was sitting in the basement. It's like blank tote bags and glow in the dark fabric paint. So I just sat there, like, the kids had gone to bed. I was like, oh, okay. And I just sat there with these kits that were supposed to be for the kids, but I'm like, I want to do this. So I'm just putting, like, lines of glow in the dark paint on tote bags. And it was so soothing. So for me, I just kind of do hobbies, arts and crafts. But as far as the interesting thing about the question for me is, like, as far as connecting what I do in my off time with what feeds me creatively, I think it is, I follow a lot of artists on Instagram, and I really like seeing how they work, and I like seeing what they're creating. I like seeing their work cycles. Like around the holidays, a lot of ceramicists, for example, are posting updates in their shops, and you see sort of if you follow people for long enough, you see how their work changes. They move locations, their work changes. And that really gets me thinking. Also, in normal times, I'll go to museums. So it gets me thinking about how I can do that in my work. I look at the arts from a tactile perspective, because playing is very tactile for me. So when I'm looking at a painting in a museum and I see something about brushstrokes, I'm in my head translating that into, could I do something kind of like that with my bow, with the texture of my bow stroke? Or could I, the intensity of this anxiety and this piece of art, could I bring that into my playing? What kind of tone would that be? So I think I just draw on all the arts and translate them into what I'm doing.
Great. Yeah, I know for me that tactileness is something that I've been missing. These virtual, content is wonderful, but being there, seeing it, feeling the, the of course now very filtered air, from the AC coming and hitting you in the concert hall, or that hustle and bustle. We will get back to that, but I know we have
one thing that will be different, though. One thing I can guarantee you will be different in the live performances is the amount. And I'm not saying this as a joke. I'm not joking about this. The amount of coughing between movements, because I played a couple of weeks in Texas, and it was a very socially distanced environment. One person coughed, and I was backstage. I was like, what is happening? I'm texting everyone. I'm like, where is that person sitting?
No one wants to be that person.
No, no
after
one wants
this.
to be
No.
coughing, because it's terrifying. And so it was the first time I played a live concert where there wasn't that, like, physical release of the coughing to kind of clear your throat between movements. And I think there will be things that change about live performance, but I miss the live attendance of performance experience so much.
Definitely.
That tactile experience where you're in a place. Everything about
Mhm.
your senses tells you what place you're in, and there's an energy from the audience that you can't replicate. But I have appreciated in virtual spaces seeing people's reactions and seeing how they interact with the performance. That's something you don't get in a concert so much.
Yeah, it's different, but in its own uniquely positive way. I don't think it's a
Hmm.
true replication, but it's really not meant to be. If we
Hmm.
do it right, it's something that can also exist after this, in addition to live performances. In my opinion, I know we have so many questions, and I think
Okay.
Brian wants to
I'm
kind
going
of
to keep it
give you.
shorter
No,
in my
he's going to
answers
give
so
you
we
a
can get
quick
to people.
succession of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
From many people who have submitted before today and today. So Brian.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm ready.
In fact, the first question was asked by two different people, Cynthia in Vienna, Virginia, and Aya Nokri in Rabat, Morocco. They both want to
Ooh.
know, what do you think about while you're performing? I want to know
While I'm
this too.
performing, yeah, it's changed over the years. So it used to be really random. I used to just sort of think about like, what am I having for dinner? And like, no, I'm performing. Stop thinking about that. And then lately, I did a bunch of solo Bach solo recitals 2 seasons ago. So the season before I went on sabbatical, so the 18-19 season. And I had never done full solo recitals before, and I had to completely change by choice. I hadn't, and I had to completely change my mentality because I was in my head so much in my first run through, which was a house concert, and then the first recital. I was doubting myself and analyzing what was happening and thinking ahead, and I was exhausted by the end of the first movement. And I had so many movements to go. By then it was like 10 minutes in, I'm like, this is not sustainable. I have to find a different way to be in the moment. And what I did then before that third performance was I learned to just trust every note and stay in that note. And if I didn't feel it was time to leave the note, I don't leave the note. I stay there. And then if I feel like the music needs to go and I'm done with the note, then I move on to the next note. And I stayed in every single note for the entire concert, not thinking back, not thinking forward, just right there. And I guess it's a sort of a meditative technique, but at the same time, it really changed how I think in a concert. So now when I'm playing, I like it was a revolution for me and stuck. So now it's just really about the note that I'm in. I'm not thinking from the outside. I'm just completely in the music.
Mike in Palm Springs wants to know, what's the most beautiful concert hall you've performed in?
Ooh, well, there are a lot of different halls that are amazing for so many different reasons. There's history, there's grandiosity, there's the proximity to the audience. There's one that just always comes to mind when someone wants to know about halls, and it's Opera City Music Hall in Tokyo, because it's all wood and it's not a huge hall. The stage isn't gigantic, and the audience isn't a very deep hall, but it is tall. And when you look up the way they've lit it and the way they've done the architecture, it feels like you're inside a pyramid. And it's the only hall I've ever played in where I felt like I was not where I was on stage. I was playing and suddenly I was like, wait, I don't know. I was like in the pyramid up there somewhere. And I felt like the hall was the instrument. It was very very special to have that experience. But every time I think about that hall, every time I go there, it really is this sort of unifying space. But with the way they've lit that pyramid, there's nothing else like it in the world. And if you look up pictures of Opera City Music Hall, you'll see what I'm talking about. But when you're actually there and you see that beautiful wood, the color, and you just want to almost touch it, it's like an instrument.
Daisy in the Czech Republic wants to know, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color, I mean, it sounds depressing, but I think it's quite exciting. At the moment, my favorite color is gray. But gray can be so many different shades, right? So there are all these different kinds of grays, and it goes with everything. And so, like, I love this kind of thing, and I can wear gray, or I can have gray in my space. And then I can have other stuff around, and it never is out of place. So I don't know. I'm just like really liking gray these days.
Nice. And then Michael in Logan, Utah, I believe, wants to know, what is your favorite movement from all of the Bach sonatas and partitas? And I'll just tack on, ooh, can you have a favorite movement or does it change?
Yeah, I don't know. I did a Bach playlist for iTunes a while back called Calming Bach. And in the course of that, I looked up every single piece I could possibly find by Bach. And I really got into the organ pieces that I hadn't really heard much live, because I don't hear live organ very much. And there aren't a lot of recitals on a regular basis wherever I am. So, and I love that instrument so much. So I really dove deep into that. And I always have had an appreciation for the chaconne, but when I played the chaconne, after exploring everything I could find with like as bombastic a sound as possible from the organ, I realized there are all these moments in the solo sonatas and partitas where his experience with that other instrument that he was a genius at, come into the violin pieces in a way that you wouldn't expect. Like sometimes there's a really loud, long, bass obligato kind of thing that's happening in the organ, but it happens in the solo violin, but it doesn't feel like it's happening in a solo violin because it's not so obvious. And in the chaconne, you can really draw out those different voices. So the chaconne was the first movement that I completely clicked with, and that happened live on stage. It was one of those things where I've been struggling. I've been trying to figure out how to pace it. I was in my teens, so I was trying to figure out, how do I pace it? What does this part mean? What is he trying to do? What's this relationship to this section? And you can really get lost in the weeds. I think I was lost in the weeds. And in that particular performance, I was like, oh, I don't know what happened, but everything started to make sense. And there was this sort of architecture to the piece, and it was building itself. I was just along for the ride. And since then, that's been my relationship to that piece. So adding in that little bit of intrigue in imagining myself playing an organ, which has so many different sounds, depending on the instrument too, that's being used. That is a continuing source of fascination. Yeah. Is that a cat?
This is Fiona. Fiona says hello.
Oh, I love the animal cameos on Zoom. Hi, Fiona.
That's what we'll miss most when this is all over, right?
I know, we have to bring our animals to work now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, that's fine.
She needed to sit on my lap in this moment. So
of course.
Well,
you're busy and you're needed elsewhere. So just coming to say hi.
Hilary, speaking of friends that Brian has, a question came in from Kevin in Irvine, and he asks, when it's safe to collaborate with colleagues again, what's the first piece of chamber music that you'll go to or are looking forward to playing again?
I have some concerts scheduled with a pianist I am really excited to work with. We played one concert together in Vienna. We're both godparents to the same child. So through friends, we were connected also musically now, because we played Beethoven Sonata No. 10, and it was a fantastic experience. We just played it once in a sort of house concert, chamber concert set up at the Concerthaus in Vienna. And we're supposed to play concerts in Japan. We're supposed to play Beethoven programs in the summer. So I'm hoping that works out. We've never played an official recital together, but it's one of those partnerships that I think it's gonna be like a very natural collaboration. And I think that repertoire is gonna be perfect for it. So I'm excited to get to those sonatas again. It's been a really long time.
We've heard from a viewer in Drammen, Norway, a question from Maren, who says they saw your Bach performance back in June of last year and loved it. Easily the best concert I've ever experienced. And the question is, do you take inspiration for your interpretations at all from the country you are visiting?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be hard not to, because you're surrounded by the sounds of different languages. every day that I experience goes into the performance. So everything that influences me that day would be expressed in the performance. And everything you see affects how you think about the architecture of music. So definitely every day is affected by the place in which the concert takes place.
A question that came in, I think, is relevant to this. It's about your Auerbach performance. And it said, how did you, quote, dance and conceptualize your movement and play the violin for the Auerbach? Did you visualize it, imagine it, or what gave you that inspiration?
Well, I always heard the piece as a recording, and I have worked with Lara in the past. We played, we premiered her fourth sonata for violin and piano together with her playing, and that was last summer, or 2 summers ago. And so I thought that I knew what I wanted. Well, I knew what I wanted to do with the piece as a player, because whenever I hear a recording of something and I want to play it, I'm listening and imagining playing it my way. Another time, like in the future, whenever I hear it, and I'm kind of obsessed with a recording of the piece. So I was kind of coming at it from that direction, but then she has really beautiful artistic ideas behind everything she writes, and she's a multi-genre artist, so she always ties in other inspirations. So before I perform any piece by a composer who's living, I send them a rehearsal recording and ask their input. And her input really surprised me. She had, if you watch the performance, you'll see she wrote like a whole email detailing her visions for each movement of the suite and what I could do differently or what she liked about what I was doing. Well, one thing she mentioned is that she had always wanted it to be a theatrical performance and not just the music that's on the page, but she didn't want to dictate to the performer how to be theatrical because she wanted it to be natural to the performer and to that moment. So she encouraged me to think outside of playing the violin. And I got this email the day before I was going, or 2 nights before I was going to film. And I was like, oh gosh, how can I, with myself, filming myself in these times where I don't have access to most spaces that I could kind of cobble together if I were doing this with freedom of motion and total access and not socially distanced and stuff not being shut down. Like, I don't know how to do this. And then I was walking back from the grocery store. I was like, wait a minute, this really feels like a moment that is like something that I feel in the piece. And so I turned on the camera and then I just followed. I was hearing the music in my head and I was walking with the music. And then I started to feel the emotion of running. And that's where that particular interlude came from. And then the dancing with oneself, I just really wanted to express what it's like to be sort of making art alone, where it's a little bit ridiculous that you might be dancing somewhere, but there's no one to dance with. So I just went outside and put the camera down on the ground and just danced with that movement in my head. So yeah, it's just kind of stuff like that. Once I framed it as an interpretation of the times now and my experience now, the rest of it came pretty naturally to me. I should mention that she wrote the piece as a reaction to 9/11. So the fact that it was written around
another mass global trauma.
Yeah. Yes. And the fact that the movement titles are so relevant to now and the sentiments are so relevant to now, I think it's really interesting. And I may be wrong about this, but if there are violinists out there, you should go check out her sheet music, because I think her publisher, Sikorsky, at the beginning of this pandemic had released it for free for download. So that's how I actually started thinking about this piece in the context of this time, because she'd sent me an email saying, hey, if you want to let anyone know, it's being released, right now for free. And I just wasn't on social media at that time, but that's why that's why this piece has, for me, also represented this time. It's been on my mind the whole time.
Well, it was memorable, and for someone, and I think I've heard you say it a few times that you this is a new space for you and a new medium, but to be the musician, the videographer, the editor, the choreographer, the recording engineer, the lighting designer, it looked so wonderful and beautiful and fantastic, and I'm sure that you have a new appreciation for all of those things, as many musicians have had to
Yes.
become their own self-producers, but it was
And
really
thank you for your help too. Like, I didn't do the editing physically. I had a very good support structure in you and your team. So thank you.
Well, we were happy to do it. I think we have time maybe for one more question. Brian, I'm gonna give this one over to you if you have one you want to throw out or pick from the list. But
yeah, I mean, I think I would like to sort of wrap up our conversation. First of all, thank you for your time. We're so grateful, and just I love listening to artists speak about their process, and all of this conversation has been just so fascinating for me, and I know for our audience as well. But just as we wrap up, it's obviously going to look different when you walk out on stage to play with an orchestra next, and we don't even know when that's going to be. But I wonder if you can maybe imagine that moment yet, and if so, what do you think you're going to be feeling? What do you think it's going to be like for you? Will it be emotional? Will it be, oh nope, I'm going back to do what I do? What can you even imagine what that moment might look like and feel like?
I can actually very clearly imagine it because I got a little bit of it. So
True.
When I did the 2 weeks, I had been off the road since August of 2019, and I hadn't done anything in front of an audience or played in the same room as another musician until November of 2020. So that was more than a year. And so that's about the length of time that I think a lot of people will have experienced between March of 2020 and when they get to maybe resume things. So for me, I was wondering, at sometimes when you step away from something so completely, you're like, is it still there for me? Because you sort of develop new patterns. I was comfortable being off the road. I'm always comfortable being off the road, but I love performing. So I was really excited to potentially go back, but I also needed to know that I felt safe in that environment. So I didn't have qualms about doing those performances. I got a taste of what it's like to be back, and no doubt it was all just right there waiting. It was not buried beneath the surface. My excitement to be on stage and the ease of performing and the way that people communicate through music, it was just really it was really right there. There was no ramping up. There was no sort of there. It was 100% there. And I think that is something people will experience. I think when people go back into the concert hall, when we all get back together on stage, what I think we'll experience is almost like a Technicolor version of what we loved before. So I think that's something to look forward to. And I think it will hit the ground running. And yes, there will be growing pains. And yes, there will be a lot of emotions, and there'll be a lot of residue of things that we need to process, but we can process it in the music too. And we can use the music and the arts experience to bond and move forward, hopefully with some new tools in place to stay connected, but without the baggage of loss and grief that a lot of the virtual experiences can contain. So yeah, I think at the end of this, we can look at it and say, okay, things are gonna, the actual experience of being in a hall together is gonna be so vibrant and so meaningful. It's gonna be emotional, but in all the best ways.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, Hilary, thank you so much for this afternoon, for this time, for this wonderful residency. Thank you for the 3 beautiful programs. For those of you watching who haven't seen these programs tonight, the next 7 hours or so is your last chance to watch Hilary Hahn's final residency concert, which features works by Bach, Ginastera, Auerbach, and a new world premiere by Michael Abels, a Philharmonic Society commission, in fact. So I hope you all have a safe rest of your 2020. Stay safe, stay healthy. 2021 has so many good things to come. I know it, I feel it in my heart, and I know that our shared camaraderie and belief in all of the good things that music brings each of our own respective communities and our global community is more powerful than any of the negativity that has really permeated this year. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Hilary. I want to give a big shout out to our editor and technical wizard, William Zauscher, for his amazing editing skills throughout this residency and a lot of the Philharmonic Society of Orange County digital concerts this fall. So again, thank you, everyone. Stay safe. We look forward to seeing you in 2021 when the music will continue to resume, and we can't wait to see you all in person sooner than later. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.